I've studied countless species across 7 sectors, but humans carry something unique in their biological signature. When Commander Vex Prime finally asked Kane to explain Scout 7's reaction, the human cadet didn't boast about special training or unique abilities. He simply stated that humans carry what he called the echoes of our entire species' survival story, encoded in their very biology. This wasn't metaphorical language. Scout 7's sensors confirmed he was describing actual biochemical markers. This reservoir of survival wisdom wasn't acquired through individual achievement, but through centuries of collective hardship. Humanity evolved not as apex predators but as persistence hunters who relied on complex social coordination. Their biological signatures tell a story of communities that survived ice ages, resource scarcity, and environmental challenges through cooperation rather than domination. Scout 7's sophisticated olfactory receptors detected this history written in Kane's pheromonal profile, a scent signature that essentially read as leadership, experience with packs numbering in the millions. Even Joro, the skeptical Zenturian cadet, conceded something staggering about human potential. His crystalline facial plates actually lost their stress fractures as he processed the implications. "You mean your species doesn't produce individual alphas through combat trials?" he asked Kane, his vocal resonators humming with disbelief. The concept of leadership emerging from social consensus rather than physical dominance was completely foreign to his warrior culture. Kane's response became a masterclass in humbling arrogance. "I'm fairly average by human standards," he stated without false modesty. "Back home, I'm just another cadet. My test scores are middle percentile. My physical evaluations are completely unremarkable." The statement hung in the air, challenging everything the Academy believed about talent identification and potential assessment. Commander Vex Prime developed a distinct migraine-like reaction, his facial ridges contracting as he processed the implications. His datapad showed Scout 7's full analysis. The Warbeast had detected leadership markers equivalent to someone who'd commanded millions. Yet here stood a cadet claiming to represent the human average. The qualitative difference wasn't in individual capability, but in the accumulated social intelligence embedded in human biology. That's when I understood we were witnessing something that exceeded simple combat capability or tactical brilliance. This was about an entirely different evolutionary pathway, one where survival depended on building stronger communities rather than stronger individuals. The Academy's entire evaluation system, built around identifying exceptional individuals, suddenly seemed inadequate for assessing a species whose strength lay in their collective wisdom. What survival wisdom embedded in human biology makes other species recognize them as natural leaders? It appears to be the biochemical evidence of their evolutionary journey, a history where the individuals who survived were those who could build trust, resolve conflicts, and coordinate complex group actions. Their scent tells the story of a species that learned to turn competitors into collaborators, that mastered the art of building alliances rather than simply conquering enemies. Scout 7 wasn't smelling Kane's personal achievements. It was detecting the genetic memory of countless generations who learned that the most dangerous predator isn't the one with the sharpest teeth, but the one that can organize the hunting party. The Academy's ultimate test had a 97% failure rate. 3 days after the Scout 7 incident, Marcus Kane found himself facing the Kobashi scenario, a simulation designed to crush conventional expectations of victory. I watched from the observation deck as final-year cadets struggled for the 3rd straight day with the impossible tactical problem. Their fleets evaporated against the simulated enemy's defenses. Their assault patterns collapsed under coordinated counterattacks. The scenario was working exactly as intended, proving that sometimes victory simply isn't possible through traditional military means. Kane entered the simulation chamber with his newly assigned squad, Joro, Pip, and the Voran twins. They took their positions at the tactical displays while instructors prepared to record another failure. The simulation began with standard parameters: enemy fleet superiority, impregnable planetary defenses, civilian populations at risk, and a time limit that made conventional siege tactics impossible. I watched previous attempts where cadets tried overwhelming force, stealth insertion, even sacrificial maneuvers. Nothing worked. Kane studied the tactical landscape for exactly 7 minutes, his eyes moving across the display with focused intensity. Then he did something no cadet had attempted in the scenario's history. He opened a direct communication channel to the enemy commander, not to issue demands or threats, not to negotiate surrender terms. He initiated a conversation about systemic vulnerabilities, crew morale structures, and long-term operational sustainability. The simulation's AI, programmed to respond to unexpected inputs, generated responses that revealed fascinating details about the enemy's command structure. Kane listened carefully, then asked about pension benefits for veteran crew members, healthcare provisions for families back home, and promotion pathways within their military structure. The questions seemed absurd given the combat scenario, but they triggered complex responses from the simulation's psychological warfare algorithms. Computer logs later showed the enemy fleet surrendering in 36 minutes. Not destroyed, not disabled, they voluntarily stood down their weapons systems and offered conditional cooperation. The staff officers in the observation deck stared at their monitors in disbelief. Instructor Gree's assessment console lit up with performance metrics that shattered every academy record. The Kobashi scenario, designed to be unwinnable, had been solved without a single shot fired. Kane's squad stood around him looking equally stunned. Joro's crystalline skin showed no stress fractures this time, only patterns of pure confusion. Pip's bioluminescent patches glowed a steady, thoughtful blue. The Varan twins had stopped their synchronized nervous movements entirely. They'd witnessed military problem-solving that didn't involve combat at all. The human cadet then filed a formal after-action report, recommending the Academy establish a department of alternative conflict resolution. His analysis pointed out that the simulation's enemy forces weren't mindless aggressors, but complex organizations with their own internal pressures and vulnerabilities. The solution wasn't to defeat them, but to understand what motivated their actions and address those root causes. What happens when a human approaches the Academy's impossible simulation with a 97% failure rate? They redefine what victory means. They look beyond the obvious conflict to the systems and structures that create it. They apply human social intelligence to military problems and achieve results that conventional tactics cannot. The Kobashi scenario remained in the training rotation, but its purpose changed entirely. From teaching cadets to accept impossible odds to teaching them to question whether the odds were calculated correctly in the first place. You know what they never taught at the Academy? Pension benefits, retirement planning, healthcare provisions for enlisted personnel's families. Marcus Kane's approach to the Kobashi scenario reframed military conflict through entirely human-centric processes. He treated the simulated enemy not as combatants to be destroyed, but as organizational structures to be understood. The tension in that simulation chamber became palpable as instructors watched. Seemingly soft negotiation techniques outperform centuries of tactical doctrine in the most brutal of crucibles. I reviewed the communication logs afterward. Kane didn't discuss weapons yields or fleet positions. He asked the enemy commander about retirement age requirements, healthcare coverage for dependents, promotion stagnation within their ranks, and whether veterans received adequate transition assistance to civilian life. The simulated commander's responses revealed systemic morale issues, troop dissatisfaction with deployment lengths, concerns about inadequate casualty compensation, frustration with limited advancement opportunities. These weren't military problems. They were human resources challenges manifesting as military aggression. Kane applied basic organizational management principles to galactic-scale conflict. He identified that the enemy's apparent strength masked internal structural weaknesses. Their forces weren't united by loyalty or shared purpose, but held together by compulsory service and inadequate support systems. The human cadet proposed solutions that addressed the root causes rather than the symptoms, recommending pension reforms, family support programs, and career transition assistance that would make military service more sustainable. The lesson became starkly clear. Empathy and systems thinking could solve problems that brute force couldn't touch. Where fleets and weapons failed, understanding organizational psychology succeeded. The enemy forces in the simulation didn't surrender because they were defeated. They stood down because someone finally addressed their actual concerns rather than just opposing their actions. Staff instructors gathered in emergency sessions to completely reconsider their training methodologies. Tactical simulations that had focused exclusively on combat effectiveness suddenly seemed incomplete. Strategy courses that emphasized force projection appeared inadequate. The entire curriculum needed to incorporate elements of organizational behavior, conflict resolution, and what humans called human resources management. That's when the paradigm truly began to shift across the academy. Instructors started asking new questions during exercises. What motivates this enemy's command structure? What internal pressures influence their decisions? What systemic weaknesses could be addressed rather than simply opposed? The focus expanded from defeating opponents to understanding them. How does basic human systems thinking unlock a crisis that military force couldn't solve? It recognizes that conflicts rarely exist in isolation. They emerge from complex systems with internal dynamics, structural pressures, and human factors. The Kabashi scenario wasn't unwinnable because the enemy was too powerful. It was unwinnable because previous cadets tried to solve a systemic problem with tactical solutions. Kane succeeded because he understood that the real battle wasn't happening in space. It was happening in the enemy's organizational structure, their compensation systems, their morale challenges. He didn't defeat the enemy fleet. He made the conflict unnecessary by addressing what actually needed fixing. I watched 3 days of training become something entirely new. The interventionist methods Kane introduced transformed what was supposed to be a lethal combat course into a synchronized cooperative showcase. Where previous squads had struggled through brute force and individual heroics, this team moved with unnerving coordination. Instructor monitors showed a 300% jump in performance metrics across communication efficiency, tactical innovation, and objective completion rates. Joro, who normally solved problems by smashing through obstacles, now used precise vibrational frequencies to weaken structural points without unnecessary destruction. His crystalline fists, previously tools of pure force, became instruments of surgical precision. He'd identify stress points and barriers and apply exactly enough pressure to create openings without collateral damage. The change was so dramatic that maintenance crews actually thanked him for not destroying another training facility. Pip's bioluminescent patches, once just biological curiosities, became strategic assets. Instead of randomly shifting colors from stress, she now used specific luminescent patterns to blind enemy sensors, signal tactical positions, and even create diversionary flashes that mimicked weapons fire. Her light emissions became a communication system that bypassed electronic jamming, allowing the squad to coordinate even when conventional systems failed. The Voran twins moved with a fluid coordination previously thought impossible for their species. Their forearms, which typically moved in anxious self-protective patterns, now worked in perfect harmony. One set maintaining defensive positions, while the other executed complex technical tasks. Their synchronized nervousness transformed into synchronized effectiveness, each anticipating the other's movements without visible signals. Kane moved at the center of this transformation, not as a commander, but as a facilitator. He didn't issue orders so much as coordinate existing strengths, making impossible teamwork look effortless. When Joro needed distraction, Kane would nod to Pip. When the twins hesitated, he'd position himself to create cover. His role was less about directing and more about enabling each member to perform at their maximum potential simultaneously. The scene demonstrated creative problem-solving in real time. Faced with a simulated energy barrier that normally required heavy weapons to breach, the team used Pip's light to overload its sensors, Joro's precise vibrations to weaken its structural integrity, and the twins' coordinated efforts to manually reroute power sources. They solved the problem through integration rather than force. Instructor Gree acknowledged the new academy record with visible astonishment. His assessment console displayed metrics that shouldn't have been possible for a mixed-species squad with only 3 days of integrated training. The performance graphs showed not just improvement, but transformation. Every member operating beyond their species documented capabilities while working in perfect coordination. The signs of paradigm shift were everywhere. Training manuals lay forgotten as instructors watched this demonstration of what became possible when species stopped trying to overcome their differences and started leveraging them. The Academy's entire approach to interspecies teamwork required reconsideration based on what we witnessed those 3 days. How do human negotiation skills transform squad performance by 300%? They create environments where different abilities become complementary rather than competitive. They establish communication frameworks that turn biological differences into tactical advantages. They build trust that allows each member to operate at their maximum potential, while supporting others doing the same. The human approach didn't make anyone better individually. It made the team better collectively, transforming separate capabilities into integrated effectiveness. Then the real crisis arrived. Admiral Korath's emergency transmission cut through the Academy's routine like a plasma torch. His grim face filled the main display in the strategy chamber, the background showing tactical readouts that made instructors freeze mid-sentence. The Devourers had broken through the outer perimeter defenses. Not probing attacks, not reconnaissance missions. A full consumption fleet had bypassed 3 defensive layers that were supposed to be impenetrable. The biomechanical menace moved through systems with methodical efficiency, consuming worlds not for territory but for raw materials to fuel its expansion. 3 colonized worlds, Zerion, Theron, and New Kaltros, now faced immediate peril. Their civilian populations totaled roughly 50 million souls across diverse species. Farmers, engineers, families, children, all facing near-certain annihilation unless something unprecedented happened. The fleet composition made veteran tacticians pale. 12 consumption-class vessels, each capable of processing entire continents into usable materials. 1 World Eater command ship directing the operation with chilling precision. These weren't warships in any traditional sense. They were mobile processing facilities designed to harvest planetary resources with terrifying efficiency. Their defensive capabilities made direct assault practically suicide. Our own fleets were too distant to respond in time for conventional defense. The nearest battle group required 18 hours at maximum warp. The Devourers would complete their consumption cycle in 14. The math was brutally simple. No military solution existed within the available time frame. Every officer in the room recognized the grim arithmetic of interstellar distances and destruction timelines. Dr. Yelanek from Xenopsychology delivered the most chilling assessment. Her research indicated the Devourers possessed no individual consciousness as we understand it, no capacity for communication, negotiation, or reasoning. They operated as a single distributed intelligence driven purely by consumption imperatives. Decades of attempted contact had yielded exactly 0 responses beyond attack patterns. Her conclusion was stark. They couldn't be reasoned with because they lacked the cognitive architecture for dialogue. The Academy faced a crisis, testing not only strategic thinking but our fundamental willingness to redefine contact itself. This wasn't about finding better weapons or smarter tactics. This demanded questioning whether our entire understanding of interspecies interaction was flawed. The silence that followed Admiral Korath's announcement was the most profound I've ever recorded. Not just absence of sound, but absence of hope. Seasoned officers who'd faced 100 battles now confronted something that couldn't be fought in any conventional sense. I watched tactical displays showing the Devourer fleet's approach vectors. The 3 threatened worlds glowed amber on the screens, their defense systems activating in doomed sequences. Evacuation protocols triggered automatically, though everyone knew there weren't enough ships to save even 10% of the populations. The scale of the impending loss was staggering, not just lives but entire ecosystems, cultures, histories about to be processed into raw materials. The Academy's entire purpose, training protectors of galactic civilization, faced its ultimate test. We were equipped to handle conflicts, not consumption. Prepared for enemies, not ecological processing systems. The very definition of threat required re-examination when facing something that didn't want conquest or territory. Just raw materials. What biomechanical threat breaks through galactic defenses and threatens 50 million civilians? A force that operates beyond conventional military understanding. A distributed intelligence that sees inhabited worlds not as communities to conquer, but resources to harvest. An enemy that cannot be fought because it doesn't recognize conflict, only consumption opportunities. The Devourers represented the ultimate test of whether galactic civilization could defend itself against something that didn't play by any known rules of engagement. What happened next defied all military protocol. Against that apocalyptic backdrop of impending destruction, Marcus Kane stepped forward and volunteered for what everyone else considered a suicide mission. While experienced commanders debated evacuation protocols and calculated acceptable losses, the human cadet proposed something entirely different. He insisted on a human-centric approach to first contact. arguing that decades of failed attempts hadn't actually constituted genuine communication. He requested the swift Arrow, a fast reconnaissance ship with enhanced communication arrays, and permission to attempt dialogue with the Devourers. His argument was simple yet revolutionary. We'd been trying to talk to them using our frameworks, our concepts of language, our assumptions about consciousness. What if we'd been speaking the wrong language entirely? What if communication required understanding their framework instead of imposing ours? In the cockpit of the Swift Arrow, Kane focused on a plan that would test the very limits of interspecies dialogue. He reviewed everything we knew about devourer behavior patterns, consumption cycles, and organizational structures. His preparation wasn't about combat readiness, but about understanding how they might perceive and process information. The ship's systems hummed with activity as he configured communication protocols that no one had attempted before. Commander Vex Prime recognized the tremendous risk, but also the potential for a paradigm-shifting breakthrough. His authorization came with heavy conditions: strict withdrawal parameters, continuous telemetry feeds, and automatic recall if hostile intent was detected. The tension in the command center was thicker than atmospheric reentry plasma. Every officer understood they might be sending a cadet to his death against something that had consumed entire civilizations. The Swift Arrow's ETA to Zerion was 16 hours, but the emotional clock ticked by the minute as Devourer consumption vessels continued their approach. Tactical displays showed the biomechanical fleet's progress in chilling detail. Worlds being systematically processed, defenses being overwhelmed, timelines shrinking toward zero. I watched those screens with growing dread and fascination, documenting what might either become a historic breakthrough or tragic failure. Why does Marcus volunteer for a suicide mission to negotiate with creatures that have no capacity for communication? Because humans operate on a fundamental principle that has served their species for millennia: the belief that understanding is always possible if you approach with the right perspective. Their history is filled with examples of turning enemies into allies, of finding common ground where none seemed to exist. Kane wasn't being reckless, he was applying his species' most successful survival strategy to a galactic-scale problem. The human approach recognized that the Devourer's consumption behavior wasn't necessarily malevolent but functional within their framework. Their inability to communicate might reflect our failure to understand their communication methods rather than their lack of capacity. Kane's mission represented the ultimate test of human social intelligence, the willingness to risk everything on the possibility that even the most alien consciousness might respond to appropriately framed dialogue. As the Swift Arrow departed, I recorded the mixed reactions across the command center. Some officers viewed it as a noble but futile gesture. Others saw desperation driving irrational decisions. A few, like Vex Prime, recognized they might be witnessing either monumental foolishness or revolutionary thinking. The ship's signature dwindled on the sensors, becoming a single point of light moving toward certain danger, armed only with communication equipment and human curiosity. What happened next rewrote galactic policy manuals in real time. The historic withdrawal of Devourer forces from Zerion began not with surrender documents but with coordinated course corrections across 12 consumption-class vessels. I watched tactical displays show the biomechanical fleet executing precise maneuvers that shifted their trajectories from approach vectors to withdrawal patterns. The command ship initiated what we later learned was their version of standby protocol, energy, signatures dropping from consumption readiness to maintenance levels. This redefinition of interspecies relations occurred faster than any treaty negotiation in recorded history. Where diplomatic processes normally required months of deliberation, this shift happened in hours. The three previously threatened worlds, Zerion, Theron, and New Kaltros, showed secure status across all monitoring systems. Their defense grids remained active but now faced no incoming threats. 50 million civilians went from certain annihilation to complete security without a single defensive weapon being fired. The new pathway toward galactic economy now included entities we'd previously classified as existential threats. Policy teams scrambled to draft frameworks for integrating biomechanical harvesters into resource management systems. Economic models that previously focused on protection and defense now needed to accommodate collaborative resource processing. The implications stretched beyond immediate crisis resolution into fundamental restructuring of interstellar relations. Kane's simple line about Sustainable strategies becoming more effective than destructive ones became a watershed moment in galactic diplomacy. His observation that consumption without renewal eventually consumes the consumer circulated through command channels, challenging centuries of military doctrine. The result demonstrated how human systems thinking could unlock crises that had seemed intractable through conventional approaches. I watched the transformation unfold across multiple monitoring stations. Technical teams analyzed the Devourer's new movement patterns, noting how their efficiency at processing materials could be redirected toward reclamation projects rather than destruction. Agricultural specialists began discussing how their capabilities might help terraform barren worlds. Energy consultants explored how their consumption processes could be harnessed for waste management. The unconventional tactic that achieved this unprecedented outcome wasn't a weapon or technology. It was the application of basic economic principles to interstellar conflict. Kane didn't defeat the Devourers, he showed them a better business model. He demonstrated that their consumption imperative could be satisfied more effectively through sustainable practices than through random destruction. Their efficiency at processing materials became an asset rather than a threat when directed toward coordinated resource management. This approach recognized that even the most alien consciousness might respond to logical frameworks that address core needs. The breakthrough came from understanding their behavior not as aggression, but as inefficient operational models. Where military strategists saw enemies to destroy, human systems thinking saw processes to optimize. The solution emerged from making existing systems work better, rather than opposing them entirely. The withdrawal completed with formal elegance. Devourer vessels assumed stationary positions at designated coordinates. Their energy signatures stabilized at non-threatening levels. Communication channels remained open, now filled with data exchanges about resource allocation formulas and processing protocols. The transition from consuming fleet to managed harvesters occurred with seamless precision that suggested they'd been waiting for this operational framework all along. What unconventional tactic makes enemy fleets surrender without firing a single shot? Presenting a better operational model, demonstrating that cooperation yields better results than conflict, showing that even consumption entities benefit from sustainable practices. The human approach proved that the most powerful solutions often involve redefining the problem rather than fighting it. This fundamental shift in conflict resolution would echo through galactic diplomacy for generations. The celebrations back at the Academy crystallized what we'd just witnessed. Where victory parties normally meant toasts to combat prowess and tactical brilliance, this gathering felt different. The Devourers' formal request for economic integration documents arrived during the festivities, their data streams containing detailed proposals for resource management partnerships. Academy leadership clustered around display panels, reading the same documents that weeks earlier would have been battle plans against these same entities. The tension shifted from military readiness to diplomatic capacity. Commanders who'd spent careers preparing for combat now contemplated establishing formal diplomatic corps. The shift from militarized conquest to collaborative problem-solving became evident in every conversation. Officers discussed negotiation frameworks instead of weapon yields, resource allocation instead of fleet positioning. The entire atmosphere felt like watching a centuries-old institution rediscover its purpose. Admiral Korath proclaimed that Kane's methods could revolutionize interspecies conflict approaches. His address to the assembled staff emphasized that future protectors would need skills beyond marksmanship and tactics. The old metrics of success, enemies defeated, territory secured, now seemed inadequate next to conflicts resolved without firing a shot. The victory was being framed as a triumph of social intelligence, rather than survival prowess. Dr. Yalnek conceded that humans possess a unique proclivity for recognizing social dynamics that other species overlook. Her research team presented findings showing how human children learn conflict resolution through play and social interaction, long before military training. Their developmental pathways prioritize understanding, group dynamics, and emotional intelligence in ways that formal military education often neglects. Kane explained that human learning of conflict resolution begins through childhood development patterns that most species don't experience. Sibling rivalries, playground negotiations, family dynamics all create neural pathways for understanding opposing perspectives and finding mutually beneficial solutions. This isn't taught in academies but cultivated through years of social interaction from earliest childhood. I watched the entire staff reconsider their fundamental assumptions about training and capability. Instructors who'd emphasized individual achievement now discussed group dynamics. Tactical specialists explored how to teach empathy alongside marksmanship. The curriculum committees began drafting proposals for entirely new training modules focused on communication and understanding rather than combat proficiency. The implications of Kane's repeated claim that he's fairly average by human standards began to truly sink in. If this cadet represented the human norm, then an entire species possesses capabilities that could transform galactic relations. Their childhood development produces adults who naturally understand conflict resolution, social dynamics, and systems thinking. This isn't exceptional talent, it's standard upbringing. What does it mean for galactic civilization when its most effective crisis resolver claims to be average among his own people? It suggests that humanity's greatest strength isn't in producing exceptional individuals, but in developing capable populations. Their educational systems, family structures, and social environments consistently produce citizens who can turn conflicts into collaborations. The average human child apparently learns negotiation skills that surpass what many species teach their military officers. The celebration became less about this single victory and more about recognizing a fundamental shift in how we approach protection and security. The Academy's purpose expanded from training warriors to developing diplomats, negotiators, and system thinkers. The definition of strength evolved from individual combat capability to collective problem-solving capacity. This realization changed how we view not just humanity, but ourselves. If conflict resolution can be learned through normal development rather than specialized training, then perhaps other species could incorporate these approaches into their own cultures. The victory party gradually transformed into a planning session for how to integrate these insights across galactic civilization. The most striking moment came when junior cadets began approaching Kane not for combat tips but for advice on communication techniques. They asked how humans learn to understand different perspectives, how they develop patience during negotiations, how they recognize underlying needs beneath surface conflicts. The questions reflected a profound shift in what these future officers valued and sought to learn. This quiet revolution in thinking may prove more significant than any military victory. The academy that trained warriors now contemplates training peacemakers. The institution that measured success in enemies defeated now considers success in conflicts prevented. This transformation began with a simple observation from a cadet who considered himself completely ordinary, yet whose capabilities suggested something extraordinary about his entire species. The formal audience unfolded as a landmark exchange that redefined interstellar diplomacy. Kane broadcast across multiple frequencies, identifying himself not as a military representative, but as a human seeking mutual understanding. His transmission used complex modulation patterns that shifted between energy signatures, chemical composition readouts, and structural resonance frequencies. He requested an audience to discuss resource allocation frameworks and potential mutual benefit, framing the conversation around sustainable systems rather than conflict. The devourer response took 30 seconds to formulate, an eternity in communication terms. Their reply manifested as a complex data stream containing consumption metrics, resource depletion timelines, and expansion imperatives. Translation systems struggled with the information density, but core patterns emerged. Query parameters unprecedented. Consumption imperative requires evaluation of alternative frameworks. The response wasn't hostile or dismissive. It was analytical, almost curious about this novel approach to interaction. The conversation pivoted into genuine dialogic negotiation about sustainability and diversification. Kane presented data on renewable resource cycles, explaining how consumption patterns could be structured around regeneration rather than depletion. He used analogies from human economic systems, showing how short-term gains often led to long-term shortages. The Devourer command ship responded with increasingly sophisticated analysis, their data streams now including probability models and risk assessment matrices. Kane offered the radical reframe that would change everything. He suggested the Devourer's appetite wasn't a problem to be solved, but a capability that could be integrated into galactic economic systems. Instead of consuming worlds, they could become managed harvesters within regulated resource networks. Their efficiency at processing materials could serve conservation efforts rather than destruction. The concept of controlled consumption within sustainable parameters appeared to resonate with their analytical frameworks. I watched Dr. Yelenek's monitoring station light up with unprecedented activity. Her instruments detected subtle shifts in the Devourer fleet's energy signatures, changes that suggested consideration rather than aggression. For the first time, she acknowledged that our usual metrics of threat assessment might be fundamentally inadequate. They're not responding as weapons, she noted quietly. They're responding as systems. The moment marked a turning point not just in this crisis but in how we approach interspecies relations. What happens when a human attempts first contact with the galaxy's most feared consumption-class predators? They discover that communication requires speaking the other party's language rather than demanding they speak yours. They find that even the most alien consciousness might respond to appropriately framed dialogue. They demonstrate that understanding isn't about finding common ground but about building bridges between different ways of processing existence. The Devourers continued transmitting complex data streams, their patterns shifting from pure consumption metrics to include questions about implementation, scalability, and long-term viability. Kane responded with human examples of sustainable practices, from oceanic farming to atmospheric renewal projects. The conversation became increasingly technical, focusing on practical implementation rather than theoretical possibilities. Two completely different modes of existence found a common language in systems management and resource optimization. Let me tell you about the most counterintuitive insight from that negotiation. The conversation yielded a startling revelation about the Devourer's fundamental nature that changed everything we thought we knew. Their consuming appetite wasn't evil or malicious, it was simply misaligned long-term planning. They operated on pure expansion logic without considering sustainability cycles, like a harvest that never bothered to reseed the fields. The path to peace emerged through diversified acquisition methods and formal economic integration. Kane explained that pure consumption strategies inevitably fail because they ignore regeneration rates and resource renewal cycles. He presented data showing how their current approach would eventually lead to critical resource shortages, even for a species as efficient as theirs. The analysis wasn't confrontational but educational, framing the problem as a strategic miscalculation rather than moral failure. He offered a complete paradigm shift away from consume or be consumed toward sustainable coexistence. The proposal outlined how Devourers could become managed harvesters within regulated resource networks, their efficiency directed toward conservation rather than destruction. They could process asteroid belts, manage stellar mining operations, and rehabilitate depleted systems, all while receiving necessary materials through structured allocation systems. The Devourer command ship halted its advance mere hours from Xerion's orbit. Its energy signatures shifted from consumption readiness to analytical processing. The fleet's movement patterns changed from aggressive approach to defensive positioning. Their response transmission indicated willingness to explore mutual benefit frameworks, requesting detailed proposals for implementation timelines and integration protocols. What followed was perhaps the most unexpected development, a formal request for consultancy services. The Devourers asked for human experts to help design their integration into galactic economic systems. They recognized that their operational models required external perspective to achieve long-term viability. The request included specifications for advisory teams, implementation timelines, and knowledge transfer protocols. I recorded the exact moment galactic history changed direction. The timestamp shows the Devourer fleet initiating reverse thrust maneuvers, their consumption vessels power down weapon systems, their command ship beginning detailed negotiations about resource management partnerships. 3 worlds that were hours from destruction now faced potential economic integration instead of annihilation. How does basic human systems thinking unlock a crisis that military force couldn't solve? It recognizes that what appears as aggression might be inefficient systems operating without adequate feedback mechanisms. It understands that even the most alien consciousness might respond to logical frameworks that address core needs rather than surface behaviors. The human approach didn't defeat the Devourers. It offered them a better way to achieve their objectives while preserving what they would have otherwise destroyed. The solution emerged from seeing consumption not as a moral failure but as a systems design problem, where military strategists saw an enemy to be destroyed. Human systems thinking saw processes to be optimized. The breakthrough wasn't about discovering new weapons, but about recognizing that the most powerful solutions often involve making existing systems work better rather than opposing them entirely. This redefinition of conflict resolution would ripple through galactic diplomacy for generations, transforming how we approach seemingly impossible confrontations. The closing sequence returned to where this entire story began, that same pristine academy corridor where Scout 7 first evaluated the cadets. The war beast approached Marcus Kane once more, its 6 nostrils flaring in that familiar pattern of assessment, but this time, instead of sitting in submission, it emitted a series of soft clicks that the translation systems interpreted as Pack Alpha is understating things again. The creature's multiple eyes focused on Kane with what I can only describe as knowing respect, as if acknowledging some truth the human kept minimizing. Commander Vex Prime stood processing this paradigm shift about human potential, his facial ridges contracting in concentration. I watched him run calculations on his datapad, comparing Kane's performance metrics against standard cadet evaluations. The numbers told one story: moderate scores, average rankings, unremarkable physical capabilities. But Scout 7's reaction told another entirely. If this human truly represented the average of his species, the implications became staggering for galactic civilization. An entire world of beings who could potentially resolve conflicts through understanding rather than force. The Academy leadership recognized they must radically evolve their training approaches. Future protectors would need skills in diplomacy, empathy, and creative problem-solving alongside traditional combat training. The curriculum committees began drafting proposals that included interspecies communication, conflict resolution techniques, and systems thinking modules. The definition of a military officer expanded from warrior to facilitator, from conqueror to bridge builder. Vex Prime's expression shifted from confusion to something resembling awe mixed with cautious optimism. He watched Kane working with a mixed-species group of junior cadets, showing them how human children learn negotiation through play and social interaction. The human moved among them not as a superior officer but as a mentor, his explanations simple yet profound. He demonstrated how seemingly childish games actually teach complex social skills that adults apply to serious conflicts. Scout 7 settled nearby, its tail giving a single deliberate wag, a signal of tacit approval that I'd never seen the creature offer anyone before. The war beast's presence seemed to validate this new approach to training, its sophisticated sensory capabilities, confirming that these soft skills were actually critical leadership qualities. I recorded that final moment when everything changed forever, the war beast, acknowledging human social intelligence, the commander embracing a broader definition of capability, the cadets learning conflict resolution through cooperative games. The corridor that once represented rigid military tradition now housed a quiet revolution in how we understand leadership and protection. How does humanity's history of collective survival translate into a scent signature that aliens can detect? It appears to be encoded in their biochemical markers, pheromonal traces that tell the story of a species that evolved through cooperation rather than domination. Their scent carries the evidence of thousands of generations who learned that survival depends not on being the strongest individual, but on building the strongest communities. Scout 7's sophisticated olfactory receptors detect this history of social evolution, reading it as demonstrated leadership experience that transcends individual achievement. The human approach to conflict, seeing opponents as potential partners, understanding that most aggression stems from unmet needs, believing that communication is always possible with the right approach. This isn't just philosophy. It's biological. It's woven into their very being through centuries of evolutionary pressure that favored social intelligence over brute strength. Their scent tells the story of a species that learned to turn conflicts into collaborations. And that story is apparently something Scout 7's advanced senses can literally smell. You know what the Academy definitely needs now? A complete overhaul of its entire training philosophy. I watched Commander Vex Prime reach this realization during the debriefing sessions, his expression shifting from confusion to determination as he processed what they'd witnessed. The Galactic Defense Academy required a bigger training program encompassing skills that had never been part of military education before. Not just expanded, transformed from the ground up. The tension came from recognizing that traditional combat training alone couldn't prepare cadets for the challenges they actually faced. The curriculum needed to incorporate conflict resolution, interspecies communication, systems analysis, and what humans call emotional intelligence. These weren't soft skills anymore, they were strategic necessities that had just saved 50 million lives. The old metrics of success needed complete redefinition. Leadership became redefined as the capacity to build stronger communities that survive impossible situations together. It shifted from individual prowess to collective facilitation. The Academy began developing exercises that measured not how many enemies a cadet could defeat, but how many conflicts they could prevent. How many opposing forces they could turn into collaborators. How many crises they could transform into opportunities for connection. If Marcus Kane truly represents the average human standard, the broader implications become the galaxy's most valuable untapped resource. An entire species that naturally develops these capabilities through normal childhood development and social interaction. Their educational systems, family structures, and cultural practices consistently produce citizens who approach problems from angles we never considered. Humanity's most powerful weapon isn't technology or physical strength, it's their way of thinking that transforms crises into connection opportunities. They see conflicts not as battles to be won, but as systems to be understood. They approach seemingly hostile entities not as enemies, but as potential partners whose behavior might reflect unmet needs rather than malicious intent. The Pack Alpha concept expanded dramatically from simple dominance to sophisticated community building. Scout 7's initial assessment of Kane as Pack Alpha wasn't about his ability to dominate others, but his capacity to organize them. His scent signature indicated someone who could build cooperative structures that made everyone more effective. The War Beast detected this not as aggressive dominance, but as facilitative leadership. The overarching message loops back to that original premise about scent and leadership evaluation. Scout 7's sophisticated olfactory receptors detected biochemical markers that tell humanity's evolutionary story, centuries of developing social intelligence as their primary survival strategy. Their scent carries the evidence of a species that learned. Cooperation wasn't just beneficial, but essential for survival. I watched the curriculum committees begin their complete overhaul with focused intensity. They analyzed human educational systems, studied childhood development patterns, and interviewed social scientists about how these capabilities develop naturally rather than through formal training. The academy that once produced warriors now contemplated producing peacemakers, negotiators, and system thinkers. What survival wisdom embedded in human biology makes other species recognize us as natural leaders? It's the biochemical evidence of our evolutionary journey, the scent signature of a species that survived not by being the strongest individuals, but by building the strongest communities. Our pheromonal markers tell the story of thousands of generations who learned that the most dangerous predator isn't the one with the sharpest teeth, but the one that can organize the hunting party. That the most secure community isn't the one with the highest walls, but the one with the strongest alliances. This wisdom isn't taught in academies. It's woven into our very biology through centuries of evolutionary pressure that favored social intelligence over brute force. Let me tell you why Kane's claim about being average matters so profoundly. The implications force us to reconfigure our basic assumptions about the human species as a whole. If what we witnessed from this cadet represents their normal standard, then humanity's collective potential becomes the galaxy's most significant strategic consideration. Their capabilities aren't about producing exceptional individuals, but about developing consistently capable populations. An entire world of humans operating at this level could become the most valuable force for peace and stability we've ever encountered. Their capacity to transform enemies into allies simply by asking the right questions represents a strategic asset that defies conventional military valuation. Where we see adversaries to be defeated, they see potential partners to be understood. This approach doesn't just resolve conflicts, it prevents them from occurring in the first place. Human resilience and Cooperative survival capabilities are forcing us to redefine galactic power structures entirely. Strength is shifting from fleet size and weapon yields to diplomatic capacity and conflict resolution skills. The ability to build trust across species lines, to find common ground where none seems to exist, to turn potential conflicts into collaborative opportunities. These are becoming the new metrics of influence. Their learning of conflict resolution through diverse family dynamics proves particularly crucial. Human children apparently develop these skills through sibling interactions, playground negotiations, and complex social environments that most species don't experience. This isn't formal education. It's organic development that occurs through normal childhood experiences. They learn empathy, compromise, and creative problem-solving as naturally as they learn to walk and talk. The Academy's initial confusion has become the galaxy's greatest opportunity. What started as a migraine for Commander Vex Prime has evolved into a blueprint for transforming interstellar relations. We're not just adding new courses to the curriculum, we're rethinking what protection and security actually mean in a complex galactic community. I found myself reconsidering every human I'd ever encountered during my service. The merchants, the diplomats, the engineers, all suddenly appeared in a new light. Their casual confidence in unfamiliar situations, their ease with interspecies interaction, their seemingly natural ability to find solutions where others saw only problems. These weren't individual talents, but manifestations of their species' evolutionary pathway. What does it mean for galactic civilization when it's most effective? Crisis Resolver claims to be average among his people. It means we've been measuring the wrong capabilities. It means our assessment systems have been overlooking the most valuable qualities because they didn't fit traditional military paradigms. It suggests that humanity's greatest contribution won't be through exceptional individuals, but through their collective ordinary excellence. The average human standard represents something revolutionary, a species that develops conflict resolution as a core competency rather than a specialized skill. Their childhood environments produce adults who approach problems from angles we never considered. Their social structures cultivate capabilities that our military academies struggle to teach. This isn't about finding the extraordinary human. It's about recognizing that their ordinary is extraordinary by galactic standards. This realization changes how we view not just humanity but ourselves. If these capabilities can be developed through normal upbringing rather than specialized training, then perhaps other species can incorporate similar approaches. The human example suggests that our future security depends less on building better weapons and more on building better understanding. Their average standard has become our new benchmark for what's possible in interstellar relations. I've witnessed many paradigm shifts across my career, but this transformation was different. The galaxy began reconfiguring its fundamental assumptions about security and capability in ways we never anticipated. Traditional metrics of threat assessment became inadequate overnight. Our measurement systems, designed to evaluate fleet strength and combat readiness, couldn't quantify the capabilities that actually mattered in resolving the Devourer crisis. Leadership became redefined not by the prowess to conquer, but by the capacity to cultivate and sustain. We watched Marcus Kane demonstrate that true strength lies in building connections rather than breaking enemies. His approach measured success not in victories achieved but in conflicts prevented, not in territories secured but in relationships established. This represented a complete inversion of centuries of military doctrine. Humanity's strength lies in their peculiar talent for building and preserving packs, communities, and mutual aid networks. Their evolutionary history favored those who could organize groups around shared survival, rather than individual dominance. This capacity to create and sustain cooperative structures through collaboration and trust emerged as perhaps their most valuable attribute. One our assessment systems had completely overlooked. Social architecture suddenly exceeded simple combat capability as a critical strategic advantage. The ability to understand group dynamics, to mediate conflicts, to build consensus across species lines, these became the new markers of effectiveness. I watched tactical officers, who could calculate missile trajectories with precision, struggle to comprehend how basic negotiation techniques had achieved what their weapons could not. I documented the exact moment when galactic defense philosophy transformed permanently. It happened during the strategy session following the Devourer withdrawal, when Admiral Karath ordered a complete review of all assessment protocols. The old classification systems that categorized species by combat capability needed replacement with frameworks that could measure diplomatic capacity, emotional intelligence, and conflict resolution skills. The old ways wouldn't work anymore, and everyone in the command center knew it. Training programs needed complete overhaul. Evaluation criteria required fundamental revision. Even recruitment standards needed rethinking to prioritize different capabilities. The shift wasn't incremental, it was foundational, affecting everything from basic training to strategic planning. How does humanity's history of collective survival translate into a scent signature that aliens can detect? It appears to be encoded in their biochemical markers through centuries of evolutionary pressure. Their pheromonal profile tells the story of a species that survived not by being the strongest individuals, but by building the strongest communities. Scout 7's sophisticated olfactory receptors detect this. History written in their scent, evidence of thousands of generations, who learned that cooperation isn't just beneficial but essential for survival. This biochemical signature reflects their unique evolutionary journey. Where other species developed sharper claws or tougher hides, humans developed better social coordination. Their scent carries the evidence of this specialization. Chemical markers indicating capacity for complex social negotiation, conflict resolution, and community building. The war beast wasn't smelling individual achievement but species-level adaptation. The paradigm shift extends beyond military strategy to how we understand biological success. Evolution apparently produces different solutions to survival challenges across species. Humanity's solution was social intelligence, their ability to turn competitors into collaborators, to build alliances rather than fortresses, to see potential partners where others see only threats. This capability is woven into their very biology through centuries of evolutionary pressure that favored cooperation over domination. Our assessment systems must now evolve to detect and develop these capabilities across all species. The future of galactic security depends not on finding better weapons, but on understanding these deeper biological advantages. The human example shows that sometimes the most powerful solutions aren't technological, but biological. Not individual, but collective. Not about force, but about understanding. What comes next will define centuries of interstellar relations. The emergence of new diplomatic corps and economic integration frameworks represents the most significant shift in galactic governance since the founding of the coalition. I'm watching previously feared entities transition into potential partners within a restructured galactic economy. The Devourer's request for consultancy services sparked similar overtures from 3 other species, previously classified as existential threats. Their integration teams now work alongside economic planners developing sustainable resource management systems. Human systems thinking provides the template for resolving conflicts we once considered intractable. Their approach of examining underlying structures rather than surface behaviors has already prevented 2 potential wars in the outer sectors. Where we saw aggression, they identified inefficient resource allocation. Where we detected hostility, they found communication breakdowns. This perspective shift is recalibrating our entire approach to interstellar relations. The capacity to recognize and leverage social dynamics has become a valued skill across military and diplomatic ranks. Cadets who once focused exclusively on combat metrics now train in conflict mediation and cross-cultural communication. The Academy's testing protocols now include exercises that measure empathy, negotiation effectiveness, and long-term strategic planning alongside traditional tactical proficiency. Training programs have expanded to incorporate what humans call emotional intelligence and systems analysis. The curriculum I'm helping develop includes modules on understanding nonverbal communication across species, recognizing unmet needs that drive conflicts, and building trust where none previously existed. These aren't supplemental courses. They're becoming core components of officer training. The definition of protector has evolved from warrior to facilitator and negotiator. Our security forces now include specialists in economic integration, cultural exchange, and conflict prevention. The role of military officers has expanded to encompass diplomatic functions we previously assigned to separate agencies. This integrated approach reflects the human understanding that security involves more than just military readiness. I'm currently advising on the new curriculum development for 17 member species. The frameworks we're creating emphasize collaborative problem-solving over competitive advantage. We're designing exercises that teach cadets to identify win-win solutions, where previous generations only saw win-lose scenarios. The training focuses on understanding interests rather than positions, needs rather than demands. The galaxy will never be the same after what we've learned from humanity, and that's probably for the best. Our systems were designed for a simpler era of clear enemies and straightforward conflicts. Today's challenges require nuanced understanding and creative solutions that traditional military approaches cannot provide. What does it mean for galactic civilization when it's most effective? Crisis Resolver claims to be average among his people. It means we've been overlooking our greatest potential resource. Humanity's ordinary citizens possess capabilities that our elite forces struggle to develop. Their childhood development produces adults who naturally understand how to build bridges across differences, find common ground in disagreement, and transform conflicts into collaborations. This realization forces us to reconsider how we identify and cultivate talent across all species. Our assessment systems must evolve to detect these social intelligence capabilities that traditional testing overlooks. The future of galactic security depends not on finding better weapons, but on developing better understanding. Not on building stronger defenses, but on creating stronger connections. The human example shows that sometimes the most powerful solutions come not from exceptional individuals, but from ordinary people applying their species' collective wisdom. Their average represents our new standard for what's possible in interstellar relations. This shift in perspective may prove more valuable than any technological advancement or military innovation we've ever developed. That war beast whimper signaled more than respect. It announced a new era where human ingenuity and empathy outperform brute strength. Extraordinary solutions often emerge from the most ordinary sources, if you know how to look. The next time you face an impossible problem, pause and consider, what would a human do? How might understanding, not opposition, transform the situation? Their approach reminds us that true power lies not in force, but in connection. The galaxy is learning that lesson now. Maybe we all should. You've never seen anything like this in a galactic academy. Scout 7, the Corfac war beast with 6 nostrils, just finished evaluating every cadet's leadership potential through scent alone. Then it sat down in front of the only human and whimpered, a sign of respect it's never shown before. What did Marcus Kane do that made this terrifying creature acknowledge him as Pack Alpha? And why did the entire staff start questioning everything they knew about leadership? The first time I watched Scout 7 evaluate cadets, I thought I understood military assessment. Commander Vex Prime stood before the line of recruits in that sterile academy corridor, the polished floors reflecting the overhead lights like still water. This was more ceremony than test, more ritual than examination, but the tension felt just as real as any battlefield. Scout 7 moved with deliberate purpose, 6 nostrils flaring as it processed each cadet. I watched the creature detect every subtle tremor, every shift in biosignatures that might indicate fear, aggression, or latent leadership. Joro's crystalline skin developed visible stress fractures along his forearms. Pip's bioluminescent patches cycled through 3 different colors in rapid succession. The Varan twins moved with perfectly synchronized nervous twitches, their forearms trembling in unison. This wasn't about physical strength or weapon proficiency. The war beast measured something far more abstract, the potential to command, to inspire, to lead under pressure. It read social signaling and chemical markers with terrifying precision, processing each candidate in under 3 seconds before moving to the next. The staff officers stood observing with detached professionalism. They'd seen this ritual hundreds of times. Standard procedure, routine evaluation. I recorded the familiar patterns, the predictable reactions, completely unaware that this session would rewrite their entire understanding of leadership assessment. Scout 7 moved down the line with unearthly efficiency, its multiple eyes tracking micro-expressions, its nostrils sampling the air for chemical traces of confidence or uncertainty. The creature dismissed the Zenturian cadet with a slight huff, evaluated the Varan twins with a thoughtful tilt of its head, and paused only briefly before the nervously shifting Pip. Then it reached the human. Marcus Kane stood motionless as the war beast approached. Unlike the others, he showed no visible stress response, no chemical spike of anxiety. Scout 7's nostrils flared wider than I'd ever seen, sampling the air around him with unprecedented intensity. The creature completed its initial inspection circle, then did something that made every staff officer straighten in disbelief. It sat down directly before the human cadet and emitted a soft, almost submissive whimper, a sound I later learned translates roughly as respectful acknowledgement of superior leadership authority. The evaluation that normally took 3 seconds had stretched to nearly a minute. All motion in the corridor ceased. Vex Prime's datapad hovered forgotten in his hand. What makes a war beast bred to identify military leadership potential suddenly break protocol for one apparently ordinary human? The answer lies not in physical prowess or tactical genius, but in something far more fundamental to human nature. You know what surprised me most about the whole thing? It wasn't the war beast's reaction. It was the wink. Marcus Kane stood completely motionless as Scout 7 finished its initial sniffing tour. But just before it circled back, the human cadet gave me this small, deliberate wink. Not to the creature, not to the commander. To me, the observer in the corner, as if we shared some private joke about the absurdity of the situation. Instead of showing the fear or tension that affected every other cadet, Kane displayed this quiet confidence that immediately shifted the room's energy. The creature began circling him in slow, spiraling patterns I'd never witnessed before. Normally, Scout 7 just does a quick pass, sniff, assess, move on. This was different. This was meticulous. The war beast's 6 nostrils flared in complex sequences, sampling the air around Kane from every possible angle. I watched staff members exchange confused glances across the corridor. Lieutenant Vrax tapped his datapad repeatedly as if expecting a malfunction. Commander Vex Prime's brow ridges lowered in concentration. This deviation wasn't in any protocol manual. Scout 7 had evaluated over 3,000 cadets and never once breached the 3-second assessment window. I checked my recorder. 47 seconds. The creature had spent 47 seconds evaluating this human, while every other cadet received the standard 3. The soft whimper that followed echoed through the silent corridor. Sound that xenopsych researchers later identified as roughly, translating to "I recognize your authority despite not fully comprehending your nature." That exact moment became the tipping point, where we realized human scent carries a leadership signature that transcends conventional evaluation metrics. The chemical markers, the pheromonal signals, whatever Scout 7 detects, it registered something about Kane that defied all previous understanding of command. Potential. That's when the entire staff started questioning everything they'd been taught about leadership assessment. The training manuals, the evaluation criteria, the centuries of established procedure, all suddenly seemed incomplete. How could an apparently average human cadet, fresh from Earth's training program, instantly command the respect of a creature specifically bred to identify leadership potential across dozens of species? The answer would force us to reconsider not just our assessment methods, but our fundamental understanding of what makes a leader. Let me tell you about humanity's most potent asset. It's not weaponry or technology. It's something far more fundamental that we'd completely overlooked until that day. The narrative had to pivot sharply away from Kane's supposed ordinariness. This was clearly intentional misdirection. His existence in that corridor wasn't about flashy combat exploits or tactical brilliance. Something far more profound was at work here. Something that forced us to reconsider our basic assumptions about capability assessment. Kane himself reframed the entire question when Commander Vex Prime finally broke protocol to ask what just happened. Instead of explaining why Scout 7 reacted to him specifically, he shifted the focus to why humanity was at the Academy in the first place, and what the institution was really trying to achieve with these evaluations. The human stood there calm as still water while the war beast maintained its sitting position. An unprecedented display of respect. Scout 7's verdict came through the translation systems moments later. The creature identified Kane as embodying what it called Pack Alpha intelligence, not just leadership potential, but demonstrated capacity for complex social coordination. The term doesn't translate perfectly, but it roughly means someone who can simultaneously manage multiple relationships, anticipate group dynamics, and maintain cohesion under pressure. Kane just shrugged and made some joke about his dog back home, understanding pack dynamics better than he did. But the humor underscored a core truth about human social development. I watched Dr. Jelinek from Xenopsychology record everything with intense focus. her instrument scanning Kane as if trying to decode some genetic memory that extended far beyond his individual years. Her equipment detected pheromonal markers and biochemical signatures that didn't match any species in the database. The exchange between Kane and Vex Prime laid the groundwork for what would become a radical redefinition of leadership itself, from individual prowess to collective facilitation. The skeptical Zenturian cadet, Joro, stood rigid nearby, his crystalline skin still showing stress fractures from his own evaluation. I could see his tactical mind struggling to process what he was witnessing. Here was a species without natural armor, without particularly impressive physical strength, without any obvious combat advantages, yet their representative had just earned the highest possible evaluation from a creature, bred to identify military leadership across the galaxy. What hidden advantage do humans carry in their very scent that reads as pack alpha to alien war beasts? The answer appears to lie in humanity's unique evolutionary path, a history of surviving not through individual strength, but through complex social structures. Their biological markers tell a story of species that mastered cooperation, conflict resolution, and community building as survival strategies. Scout 7 wasn't smelling Kane's personal achievements. It was detecting the accumulated wisdom of thousands of generations who learned that the strongest pack isn't the one with the sharpest teeth, but the one that works together most effectively. This realization would force the Academy to completely reconsider how it identified and developed leadership potential across all species.